In this video today, I'm going to be talking about narrative. I'm going to be talking about my two favourite films which I think have a particular interest in narrative. And also we're going to be talking about the techniques that can affect the narrative and change a story. The techniques we're going to be talking about are telegraphing, dangling cause, and dramatic irony. Telegraphing is when the audience know what is going to happen by what the character says. So for example, a character can say, I will see you at the shop later on. The audience then know that later on, them two characters are going to be meeting at the shop. A really interesting adaptation of this technique is false telegraphing. False telegraphing is when a character says, we're going to go to the shop later on and meet there, but before they get to the shop, the character gets taken somewhere else, or something happens where the character doesn't end up going to the shop, so the audience, what they thought was going to happen, doesn't actually happen. And this can be really interesting in a movie and change the dynamics completely. Another type of telegraphing is called deadline telegraphing, where a character has a certain amount of time to get to the destination. So this could be involved in a chase or saving someone's life. They've only got 3 hours to get to a location to save someone's life. Something like that. That's what deadline telegraphing is. Dangling cause. A dangling cause. The simple idea of a dangling cause is the audience have been given a line or something to think about, but the answer to this thing they've been given isn't answered till later on in the movie, and that's why it dangles in the audience's mind. And the cause is what's going to happen with that situation. In general, a dangling cause is an expression of intent, of hope, fear, laughter, or any theme that could be brought upon later on in the movie. Finally, dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is when the audience knows something when an actor on screen doesn't know. So, for example, before a particular scene, the audience could have been told that this other actor's going to be chased and they're going to try and get him. The audience know this, but the character on screen has no idea what's about to happen or could happen to him. In some films, dramatic irony is not only used for the audience and a character, but also between characters in a movie. Dramatic irony leads into ironic tension, and this build-up of tension can really establish a scene. The fact that the audience knows something that a character on screen might not gives the audience a chance to be involved in the story, and keeps them on the edge and keeps them wanting to see what's going to happen to the character. Now I'm going to be talking about two films that I think have interesting narratives. Two films that have particularly interesting narratives that I like are Seven by David Fincher and A Midnight in Paris by Woody Allen. In Seven, there are two homicide detectives, Morgan Freeman, who plays Somerset, and Brad Pitt, who plays Mills. They are both on a desperate hunt for a serial killer who justifies his actions through the testament of the 7 deadly sins. The 7 deadly sins are gluttony, lust, sloth, wrath, envy, pride, and greed. The whole film revolves around one character, John Doe, who is played by Kevin Spacey, who we don't meet and we don't see until 3/4 of the way through the movie, when he is unrevealed. We see John Doe thinking he's some sort of son of God, handing out all these punishments to these 7 random people who he thinks has these deadly sins. He carries out 5 tragic murders to victims from all 7 of these sins, apart from wrath and envy. As in John Doe's mind, wrath and envy come under himself and Detective Mills. Towards the end of Seven, we as an audience gather the feeling of a dangling cause, as he keeps emphasising about these 2 great sins and how they're going to really impact society and Detective Mills. And once they get to the location John Doe wants them to be at, Mills and Detective Somerset get a package which has Detective Mills' wife's head in it. So envy and wrath are both created through John Doe being envious of Detective Mills' life and Detective Mills' eventual killing of John Doe. The cause of suspense is when Detective Mills and Detective Somerset receive a package that has Detective Mills' wife's head in it. And the effect of this is the murdering of John Doe. And this is how the dangling cause is used in Seven. I think the narrative is really clever, and it makes the audience really think about the deadly sins and really be engaged in the movie as well. The narrative has a clear structure and doesn't really follow any of the out of the ordinary structures, but overall has a brilliant storyline and is really easy to follow, but also hard to understand the more mature themes involved. A Midnight in Paris has a really different and unique narrative. The movie starts very conventional and mundane. It's a usual family vacation to Paris. But then a dangling cause gets introduced. We find out Gil's love for the 1920s in Paris. And about 15 minutes into the movie, Gil gets split from his friends and his fiancée and sits under a clock in one of Paris's squares. And when the clock strikes 12, the entire scene changes. It goes from being the modern day to become the 1920s in Paris, as a wagon comes and picks him up, and he goes and meets all these famous writers and artists from the 1920s that are all his inspirations. He meets the likes of Scott Fitzgerald and Hemingway and Pablo Picasso. Hemingway tells Gil that his book can be looked over by a famous critic called Gertrude, and as Gil is a writer in the USA, he takes his book back the next day, or the next night at 12 o'clock, to Gertrude's house. He starts speaking to Pablo Picasso's mistress, Adriana, and you can already understand the connection between the two. Along the way, Gil starts to meet even more famous people, artists like Salvador Dali, and scriptwriters like Man Ray and Luis Buñuel. Him and Adriana fall in love, and they roam the streets of Paris together. But they end up in a bar, and this bar then goes back in time into the 1890s, where this is Adriana's favourite era of time. Adriana meets Pablo Picasso's inspiration, Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, and Adriana wants to stay in this time period. But Gil doesn't. Gil thinks the 1920s are the better period, so he decided to split up with her, and they leave each other after they say their goodbyes. He goes back to Gertrude, and Gertrude tells him how surreal and impacting his book is, and how it can be a real success. And Gertrude and Hemingway both realise that the protagonist's wife is having a relationship with the pedantic man, which foreshadows the fact that Gil's wife is having a relationship with one of her friends. He goes back to the modern day and splits up with his fiancée and meets a lovely girl from the record shop. They are in the rain and they clearly start to connect, and you see Gil's new life start to unfold. Throughout this film, dramatic irony is used, as the characters around Gil in the modern day don't know about his trips to the 1920s, and the characters in the 1920s don't know that Gil's actually from the modern day. So this creates a nice relationship between Gil and the audience, and therefore we as an audience become more connected to Gil as a character. I think the narrative is really effective and works, and I think the way in which the 1920s and the modern day differentiate is really clever, and the way Woody Allen portrays this really keeps the audience engaged. And that's my summary of techniques used within narratives, and two of my favourite narratives that I think are very interesting.